Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Empty House. Chapter 1, The Phantom in the Fog. If what you see in the fog isn't a person, it might be a memory, or something worse, a warning. That evening, the London fog was so thick one could imagine it as giant shrouds covering the city, veiling both the living and the dead. In the old room on Baker Street, the fireplace blazed, and I, Dr. John Watson, was midway through jotting down notes on the case of the cursed necklace in Cornwall that Holmes had just solved a week earlier. I sat reflecting on the rare moments of peace when Holmes wasn't caught up in a case. Yet, as always, tranquility never lasted long with someone like him. A sudden knock rang out, urgent, violent. It wasn't the knock of a polite or calm person. It was the kind of knock that carried desperation, fear, and perhaps even a dark omen. I went to open the door. A man in dark, rain-soaked clothing stumbled in as if hell itself were at his heels. He was gasping for breath, his hands trembling as if gripped by a fever. Before I could speak, Holmes addressed him from the armchair where he sat, his sharp eyes never leaving the half-burned cigarette between his fingers. "Sit down, Mr. Dobson. I presume you have something to say about the house at 13 Holloway Street, rumored to have whispers in the night and flickering lights in the attic that's been abandoned for the past 3 years. The man, Dobson, widened his eyes and dropped his jaw as if his soul had just been ripped from his body. He collapsed into a chair, clutching his head with both hands, muttering fragmented, incoherent sentences. But one thing was certain, his fear was real. Mr. Dobson was not the first resident near number 13 to speak of strange happenings. But he was the first to come to Holmes. Though I had grown accustomed to eerie tales, a chill still crept down my spine as Dobson recounted how for the past 3 nights, he had heard footsteps from the second floor of the house, the sound of furniture scraping, and then a dim light glowing from the window, despite the house having been abandoned for years. What finally broke him was the sight of a tall figure standing still behind the curtain, gazing out at the street as if watching someone. Holmes's expression remained unchanged. He rose, took his pipe, and began pacing the room, a sign that his mind had been set into motion. Dobson said he had called the police. They came, checked, and found nothing. The house was locked. No signs of intrusion. But the following night, it all happened again. This time, he swore he had clearly seen the figure, tall, head tilted to one side, as if the neck had been broken. Holmes glanced at me and murmured softly, "Watson, I believe we're due for a midnight stroll through the London fog." Holloway Street was not far from the city centre, but remote enough that wind and mist could settle there all night. When we arrived, the clock struck midnight. Number 13 was a 3-story, antiquated house nestled between 2 others with their lights on. Its facade was peeling, the walls moss-covered, the second-floor windows faintly aglow. We stood silently under the hazy gaslight. Holmes pulled a small spyglass from his coat and scrutinized every corner. No movement. We knocked on the door of number 11, Mr. Dobson's residence, to borrow the key. He refused to accompany us. Understandably so. Fear is natural for someone who's seen a ghost. As Holmes turned the key, the door creaked with a dry rasp, like the throat of a man dying of thirst. Inside, the air was icy, heavy with mold and soot. I lit the oil lamp. Its dim glow swept across the thick dust on the wooden floor. Each of our steps left a clear mark. That's when I noticed something, other footprints, newer. Looping from the front door into the depths of the house, vanishing near the stairs leading to the second floor. Holmes nodded at me, whispering, "We're not the only ones who've come here tonight." We ascended to the second floor, each step groaning under our weight. Upstairs were 3 rooms, a large bedroom, a storage room, and a study with decaying bookshelves. It was in the study that Holmes stopped. On the floor were drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled across the wood. At the end of the trail, near the window, stood a chair. On it was a patch of peeling wood with a strange smell of kerosene. Holmes knelt and sniffed the wood carefully. Someone has been sitting here for a long time, night after night, watching the street. I approached the window. From here, one could clearly see Dobson's house. It was easy to understand why he felt watched. Suddenly, Holmes pulled me back. He gestured for silence. From below, from the basement, came a soft noise, like something falling onto the wooden floor. The sound wasn't loud, but in the dead silence, it echoed like a coffin being nailed shut. We drew our revolvers. Holmes signaled for me to guard the door while he moved downstairs. His footsteps were so light I could barely hear them. Only when he motioned for me to follow did I descend. The basement door stood ajar. Faint light from the oil lamp flickered down. A narrow, old iron spiral staircase led the way. We stepped down slowly, each tread groaning beneath us. The cellar was pitch dark. But in that darkness was a faint, bluish glimmer, like the reflection off metal. Holmes approached. It was a watch face, still ticking. A pocket watch, resting on a rotting wooden table beside an old leather notebook. I picked it up. The first page bore a name, Edgar Wells, a historian who had gone missing 3 months ago. He was the last known person to enter this house to study its Victorian architecture, never to return. On the final page of the notebook, in shaky, scrawled handwriting, were the words. The room behind the bookcase, it won't let me leave. It has been waiting for someone. If you find this notebook, do not stay past midnight. Holmes furrowed his brow, his eyes flashing with the glint of a dreadful revelation. He motioned for me to look at the far end of the basement. There stood a bookshelf, rotten, but something was off about it. Holmes pressed against it lightly. It groaned, then slowly rotated, revealing a narrow, pitch-black corridor. I had never seen Holmes hesitate. But this time, he paused for a second. Something's not right here. I peered into the hallway. Cold. Bitterly cold. Holmes lit his pipe, took a breath, then stepped inside. And that was when the door behind us closed with a click. Chapter 2, An Invitation from Chief Inspector Lestrade. The greatest mysteries are not always hidden in the darkest places, they often lurk within the suspiciously ordinary. The air in the narrow, pitch-black hallway behind the rotating wall felt like it was squeezing the breath from my lungs. The oil lamp dimmed, its light fading as Holmes advanced step by step into the darkness, and I followed closely behind him, my revolver at the ready. The door behind us had shut via some unknown mechanism, no handle, no latch, and no sound from behind. The passage was just wide enough for one person to walk straight through. The walls on either side were thick with cobwebs, moss clinging to every crack. Beneath our feet, the stone floor was freezing cold, untouched, perhaps, for many years. Yet there was no denying the sense, an unshakable feeling, that something within the tunnel was watching us. Holmes paused at a bend. He placed his hand against the wall, feeling a faint, unnatural vibration from the other side. Then he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. We are not the first to enter this place. But we may be the last, if we don't find a way out. We continued for another few dozen steps. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a small, square chamber. There was only one object on the wall, a painting. Beneath it stood a table, and on the table, neatly placed, was a card. I stepped forward and read the inscription on the card. The ink had dried, but the words remained clear. Welcome, curious one. It is time for the game to begin. I turned to Holmes. His face was expressionless, but his eyes gleamed. I recognized that look, not fear, but the thrill of a mind encountering a worthy labyrinth. But before we could react, a sound came from above. A small hatch opened in the ceiling, releasing a wave of cold air and a familiar noise, footsteps. Then, my oil lamp suddenly went out. I blinked in the darkness. When light returned, this time from a lamp already lit on the wall. Holmes was standing, holding another slip of paper that had fallen from the ceiling hatch. He read aloud. "Seek the invitation where the light does not shine. Find the name that does not exist among the dead." Before long, we found a steel door hidden in the corner wall, leading back up to the ground floor. As we opened it, the first thing that struck me was the change in the air, colder, damper, and tinged with the coppery scent of old blood. We returned to the sitting room. But Holmes did not appear ready to leave. He walked straight to the fireplace, seemingly harmless before, and began removing bricks one by one with great care. Behind the wall was a wooden box. Inside it, a letter sealed with red wax. The seal bore the image of a raven with outstretched wings. Holmes said softly, "An old symbol used in Victorian espionage circles. The raven announces death, or a secret about to be exposed." He opened the letter. His eyes scanned it, and for the first time that night, I saw Holmes hesitate. The message was brief. "Do not investigate further. If you do, the next person lying in the basement room will be Watson." 3 days later, with the London fog still lingering, a horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of 221B Baker Street. Holmes received another letter, this time from Chief Inspector Lestrade. The note contained no polite request, no reproach for Holmes's involvement in the case, just a single, concise line. A headless body was found by the Camden Canal. In the victim's hand was a pocket watch engraved with the initials W.E., the same type Edgar Wells once carried. "We need you and Dr. Watson at the scene. Urgent." Holmes and I departed immediately. When we arrived, the sight before us sent a chill down my spine. The corpse lay face down, the neck a gaping void, as if torn by a thin wire. In the left hand was Edgar Wells's pocket watch, still ticking, showing precisely 3 a.m., the hour he had vanished. Lestrade stood on the opposite bank, his face furrowed with worry. We examined the body. Though headless, the victim's right hand bore a silver ring etched with the image of a raven with outstretched wings. Holmes cast me a glance, then said to Lestrade, "This body is not Edgar Wells. This man was killed to throw us off. As for Wells, he may still be alive. Or, he may be under someone's control, forced to do something far worse." Lestrade frowned. "What could be worse than death?" Holmes replied, his voice as steady as steel. "To be controlled so completely that one commits murder without even knowing who they are killing." We returned to Baker Street, bringing the ring and the watch for analysis. Holmes placed them on the table and examined both with a magnifying glass. Inside the watch cover was a series of engraved numbers. 13-0-4-7-1. I asked, "A code?" Holmes shook his head. "No. A timestamp. The 13th day, at 0:47. Likely the time of the next incident." I asked again, "Incident of what?" Holmes answered without hesitation. "A murder. It could be Lestrade. It could be us. Or Mr. Dobson." At exactly midnight that day, Holmes pulled me into a carriage, not saying where we were headed. Only when the vehicle turned onto Holloway Street did I understand. Number 13 still stood there, cold, silent, as if no one had entered it since that night. But this time, the door was already open. No signs of forced entry, no sounds at all. We stepped inside. On the sitting room table, where the threatening letter had once been, there now lay a different handwritten note. "Do not go to the 3rd floor. If you do, the one who follows will be the one to hang." Holmes looked at me. I understood immediately, the one who follows was me. He signaled for me to stay back, then ascended the stairs, light as a phantom. I remained below, heart pounding. Holmes's footsteps stopped. 1 minute. Then 2. Then, a sharp thud, like a heavy object falling. I couldn't wait any longer. I rushed up to the third floor. There, Holmes stood before a half-open room. He wasn't looking at me, but at what was inside. I stepped closer and looked in. The sight froze the blood in my veins. A body hung from the ceiling beam. The face distorted, but still recognizable. It was Mr. Dobson. Pinned to his chest was a note. "I told you not to come up. You made the wrong choice." Holmes stood motionless. Then he turned to me, his eyes solemn. "No one hanged him. This room has no fingerprints, no other footprints. He may have been hypnotized. Or, this is a message from the one pulling the strings." I asked, "Then who is the next target?" Holmes was silent. Then he picked up a small scrap of paper tucked into the victim's sleeve. It bore just one line. "Goodbye, Dr. Watson." Chapter 3, The Shadow Behind the Third Floor Door. When death speaks, silence becomes the final warning. I stood frozen before Dobson's hanging corpse, his hand still clutching the piece of paper bearing a message aimed directly at me. In that moment, the entire room felt swallowed by a dense fog. Not the kind that clung to the streets outside, but one of dread, of a challenge pushed to its limit. Holmes did not look at me. His gaze remained fixed on the ceiling beam from which the noose hung. I knew that inside his mind, hundreds of hypotheses were turning over. And I also knew one thing for certain: this death was no mere warning. Holmes motioned with his hand, and I stepped back a few paces. He pulled a thin coil of rope from inside his coat and climbed up to the window ledge to approach the beam without touching the body. After a few minutes of observation, he turned to me, his voice as cold as steel in the fog. "No signs of struggle. No scratches. This was not an ordinary suicide. Nor was it a murder as we understand it. Someone gave the order. And he obeyed." I gasped. "You mean, hypnotism?" Holmes didn't answer. He walked straight to the door on the third floor, the very one the warning note had cautioned us about. The door wasn't locked, bore no signs of force, but what lay beyond was unknown. I stopped him. "What if it's trapped?" Holmes tilted his head. "That's exactly why I can't let you open it." He pushed the door open. A black void greeted us. The room was empty, but it felt as though it were breathing. The air inside was thick, damp, and laced with a strange scent, like chloroform. We stepped inside. The walls were painted black, and heavy curtains hung from the ceiling. In the center of the room stood a long table covered in red cloth. On it were only two items, a wooden box, and a small pendulum clock, swaying gently. Holmes sat down and opened the box. Inside was a reel of audio tape, and a faded photograph, of a man wearing a long cloak. The face had been cut from the photo, but behind him hung a familiar symbol, the outstretched winged raven. I saw Holmes's expression grow heavier. He picked up the tape and silently handed it to me. He said, "Dr. Watson, I need you to go home immediately. No hesitation. Take this tape, and if anyone knocks, police, neighbors, postmen, don't open. Don't answer. Don't even look out the window." I froze. "What do you suspect?" Holmes gave a faint, humorless smile, more resignation than mirth. "I suspect, we are being watched across time." I returned to 221B Baker Street with a deep sense of unease. It was late, the streets empty. Every one of my footsteps echoed back from London's cold grey walls. Once home, I locked the door tightly, drew the curtains, and turned on the small lamp in the sitting room. The tape in my hand felt alive, heavy with promise and threat. I placed it into the machine, adjusted the dials, and pressed play. A static hiss filled the room for several seconds before a voice began, low, slow, and rhythmic, almost hypnotic. "Good evening, Dr. Watson. If you are hearing this tape, then Sherlock Holmes has broken the taboo of the third floor. But understand, this is no longer a game of cat and mouse. This is a silent chess match, where the first to show emotion will lose. I swallowed hard. The voice, it sounded familiar. But I couldn't place it. The voice continued. Recall July 4, 1886. Riddle Hollow Village. A child went missing, then returned, eyes vacant. You examined him. You wrote in your report that it was psychological trauma. But you were wrong. I shot upright. My God! How did this person know about that? That memory. I had tried for years to forget. The voice continued. You saw it. You knew. And now, we need you to remember. Because the truth cannot be buried forever. The tape ended. I sat frozen. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The memories surged back, of that boy, his eyes rolled white, speaking in tongues no one understood, drawing a strange symbol on the hospital wall, the outstretched winged raven. I slumped into the chair. Holmes was right. This wasn't merely a murder case. This was a web. Woven of the past, of hypnotism, of haunting memories, and of secrets that should never have been unearthed. The next morning, Holmes returned. His coat was dusty, but his eyes still sharp. He sat without a word, simply watching me, as if reading every twitch of my face. I said, Holmes, I listened to the tape. He nodded. I know. They want to awaken your memories. I asked, who are they? Holmes replied slowly, they are those who do not exist in records. No name, no age, no face. Only the symbol of the raven. And one mission, to break the human will through the memories we most wish to forget. I asked, then what about Dobson? Holmes said, he used to be a doctor at the asylum near Riddle Hollow. Where that boy was treated. I'm certain he saw something he shouldn't have. And he was eliminated. I asked again, and now it's my turn. Holmes looked me straight in the eyes. No. Now it's mine. But they don't know one thing, I've invited a guest to join us. I asked, who? Holmes smiled faintly. A survivor of the Hollow incident. The only one who still holds the memories, but has feigned madness for over 20 years in order to stay alive. We traveled to a retirement home on the outskirts of London. The man Holmes spoke of sat by a window, gazing out at a flowerless garden. His hair was snow white, eyes clouded. But when Holmes spoke, the man turned, and his eyes suddenly lit up. You've come. At last. Sherlock Holmes has come. I stepped closer. He looked at me and nodded. And this is Dr. Watson. The one who examined the boy. I froze. All these years, how could he remember? He whispered, that child did not return alone. The thing that followed him, is now in London. And it has a new host. Holmes asked quietly, who? The old man let out a raspy laugh, like someone who no longer feared anything. It is Edgar Wells. Chapter 4, The Memory of the Outstretched Winged Raven. Memory never dies, it merely hides in the dark, waiting for the moment to rise and reclaim its voice. I left the retirement home in a state of turmoil. The name Edgar Wells swirled in my mind like a riddle with no answer. Who was he? A murderer? Something inhuman wearing a human form? Or merely a shadow stretched long from a blood-stained and hallucinatory past? Holmes walked beside me, silent as if he were listening to the whispers of the world. He didn't need to speak, but I knew, within his mind, an invisible hunt was underway. We returned to 221B Baker Street. Holmes didn't go inside right away but paused under the eaves, gazing up at the ashen sky. He spoke softly, as though to himself. If that name truly is Edgar Wells, then what we're facing is no longer human. I asked, unable to hide the unease in my voice. "Have you ever met him?" Holmes did not turn to me, but his answer chilled me to the bone. "I've seen those eyes, in the dream of a suicidal patient." We began combing through old records. The name Edgar Wells did not appear in any official documents. No birth certificate, no hospital file, no address. Yet there were traces, scattered across unsolved cases. A case in Norfolk in 1879, an entire family of 3 died in their sleep, smiling. A case in Scotland in 1883, 4 men walked into the woods and hanged themselves from the same branch. And especially, the mass disappearance in the village of Riddle Hollow, the place where my own horrific memory began. They all had one thing in common: no signs of struggle, no injuries, but always a symbol of an outstretched winged raven, drawn in dried blood at the scene. A few survivors described seeing a tall, thin man in a long cloak, his face swallowed by darkness. Some called him the Shadow, others the Silent Voice. But one name appeared most frequently in scattered notes: Edgar Wells. Holmes pieced the memories together and concluded, "That is not a real name. It's a shell, a skin crafted to move among fear." I growled. "Then what is it?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. He opened a box containing evidence from old cases and retrieved a worn leather journal. He said, "This is the diary of a priest who once performed an exorcism in southern Italy. It contains an account of an ancient entity that feeds on human suffering, particularly on repressed, painful memories. It doesn't kill in the usual sense, but drains the soul through buried trauma. When the memories awaken, the soul disintegrates." I skimmed a few lines, and my eyes froze on the final passage. To summon it, one needs only a symbol drawn in blood, and a memory yet to be forgiven. I gripped the journal tightly. A wave of horror swept over me. What's hunting us doesn't merely want our lives, it wants our most shameful memories. And I knew I carried within me a piece of that past I had once tried to erase. That night, Holmes urged me to sleep early. But I knew he would stay up all night researching. Before going to my room, I glanced into the study, where he had placed the journal and the faded photo from the empty house. He was pinning maps to the wall, marking overlapping points with red thread. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a tapping sound. Not on the door. On the window. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Repeated. I crept toward it and gently pulled back the curtain. Outside stood a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't move, just stared straight at me. But his eyes were completely white. No pupils, no emotion. Just 2 endless voids. I backed away, my heart pounding. But when I blinked, he was gone. I rushed downstairs to find Holmes. He was still seated, but his expression was no longer alert. He was murmuring nonsense, his lips trembling. "3rd floor, red light, no way out." I shook his shoulder. He jolted, looked up, and gradually his gaze cleared. He looked at me and whispered, "He's trying to get into my mind, Watson. But I haven't let him in. Yet. I don't know how much longer I can resist." My voice cracked with fear. "What do we do now?" Holmes replied. "We go back to where it all began, Riddle Hollow. There, we'll find the memory that was never forgiven. And with luck, still have time to escape." The next morning, we departed early. London's sky was as grey as ever, but that day, it seemed darker still. The train ride to the countryside lasted 3 hours, and neither of us said a word. Holmes closed his eyes, his fingers playing with a small wooden rosary, something he only did when facing that which logic could not explain. Riddle Hollow lay in a depression, surrounded by dense forest. From afar, the village looked as if it were sinking, not due to terrain, but under the weight of memory. We arrived just as a light rain began to fall. The abandoned wooden houses stood silent, roofs blanketed in moss, walls cracked. On every door were remnants of old warding sigils, torn and weathered by wind and time. Holmes led me to the last house in the village, where the boy had once lived. Only part of a wall remained, the roof had collapsed. But in the center of the floor, it was still there, the outstretched winged raven, drawn in charred black ash. I knelt beside it. Looking at it, a wave of dizziness hit me. I was back in 1886, standing in the hospital room where the boy had been brought. He did not speak, did not move, just stared at me. And in his eyes was a shattered world. I saw myself touch his hand. And then, the image fractured. But a voice echoed through the memory. You let it live. And now, you must pay the price. I screamed, collapsing backward. Holmes caught me. His face was pale but calm. You remember now, don't you? I nodded, my lips dry. I didn't treat that child. I subjected him to a hypnosis experiment to silence him. It was a government directive. They wanted to erase his memory, so no one would know what really happened in Hollow. And I agreed. Holmes said. And because of that, the entity has followed you ever since. I said nothing. For the first time in my life, I had no idea how to save myself. Holmes stepped into the center of the raven symbol, pulling from his coat a small pouch of ash. He began sprinkling it in a circle while chanting in an ancient tongue. I asked, "What language is that?" He replied, "It's the tongue of the dream keepers." The ancient Celts believed that if one called correctly, they could seal the door to cursed memory. The sky suddenly darkened. The wind turned, howling through the trees. The house trembled, as if the earth beneath us had begun to boil. And then, he appeared. Edgar Wells, or the thing that wore that name, stepped from the shadows. No sound. No eyes. Just a presence. Pulling every flawed memory from us, piece by piece. He didn't need to speak. He simply stood there. But Holmes advanced, raising the final pouch of ash. He shouted, "We do not forgive the memory of our mistakes. But we will not let them consume our souls. Be gone." The ash scattered. A vortex of wind erupted. Wells screamed in silence, his form unraveling, not like flesh, but like a torn illusion. The wind ceased. The sky began to clear. Holmes collapsed. I caught him. He looked at me and offered a weary smile. "We're alive. But I fear, this memory will never leave us." Chapter 5, The Unsent Letter. What kills a man fastest is not the wound on his body, but the words left unsaid in a letter never sent. After leaving Riddle Hollow, I thought everything was over. The shadow named Edgar Wells had dissolved into the wind, and the horrifying memories seemed sealed away in ashes. But I was wrong. We hadn't destroyed him. We had only locked the door that led to him. And a door, once it exists, will eventually be found. Holmes was silent for the entire train ride back to London. He didn't say a word, his eyes staring out the window, where the wild fields blurred past like fragments of memories that refused to fade. I looked at Holmes and wondered, what was going on in the mind of that great man? After all these years fighting evil, had something within him finally shattered? When we returned to 221B Baker Street, Holmes went into his room and shut the door. For 3 days, he did not come out, no food, no drink, no communication. I left him alone, because I knew, some battles must be fought in silence. On the 4th day, I received an envelope, no name, no postmark, neatly placed in front of the house. Thick paper, aged ivory, edged in blood red. My hand trembled slightly as I picked it up. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the script jagged and uneven, as if written by someone on their deathbed. "You have seen me, but you do not yet understand what I am. I do not live in the body. I live in regret, in the unsaid, in the letters torn apart. If you truly want to end this, come to the abandoned church at 7 Elms. Where your father last prayed. Bring the letter you never sent. No signature. No other clue. But I knew the letter wasn't meant for me. It was for Holmes. I knocked on his door. No answer. I turned the knob. It wasn't locked. Holmes sat in the dark room, rolls of paper scattered around him. In his hand was a crumpled letter, clearly opened and refolded many times. On the table lay an old photograph, a man in a priest's robe, salt and pepper hair, sorrowful eyes. I asked gently. Is something wrong, Holmes? He didn't look at me, but his voice rose, low and heavy like ash. I once had a father. I said nothing. It was the first time he had ever mentioned his father. Holmes continued. He wasn't an ideal father. He was a priest, but he lived with a heart full of doubt. When I was a child, he taught me to believe in the sacred, but he never truly believed himself. Then one day, he left everything. Disappeared. Without a word. I spoke softly. And you never looked for him? Holmes shook his head. I wrote dozens of letters. But I never sent them. I thought I didn't need him, didn't need forgiveness, didn't need answers. I thought I was strong enough. I handed him the anonymous letter. Holmes read it, eyes narrowing. 7 Elms, I said. Do you know the place? Holmes nodded slightly. It's where my father used to serve, before he left the parish. I went there once. Couldn't bring myself to go inside. He stood up. Without another word, I knew he was ready. 7 Elms lay in the southern outskirts of London, forgotten among rows of elms and patches of wasteland. The church had been closed for over 20 years, covered in moss, its wooden doors peeling, stained glass shattered like broken memories. We stepped inside. There was no light, only the damp smell of mildew and the sound of wind howling through broken windows. The pews were skeletal. The crucifix still hung on the stone wall, tilted as if about to fall. Holmes walked straight to the pulpit. He knelt down and pulled from his coat pocket an old envelope, sealed with red wax, partially broken. I recognized the handwriting as his own. He opened the letter. Slowly, as if reopening an old wound. Father. I thought I didn't need you. But I was wrong. I was angry at your silence. But I've learned that silence is more terrifying than death. I've seen things I cannot explain, heard whispers that do not belong to this world. And I understand now, sometimes, silence doesn't mean lack of love. But not knowing how to love the right way. If you are alive, let me see you. If you are dead, please forgive me. Your son. Sherlock. He placed the letter on the pulpit. At that very moment, a noise echoed from beneath the altar. Wood creaked. We both turned. From under the floor, a stone slab slid aside. A spiral staircase appeared, leading down into the earth. No words were needed, we both knew, this was the only way. We descended. The flickering light of an oil lantern revealed moss-covered stone walls. The deeper we went, the colder it became. When we reached the bottom, we stood in an underground chamber, half the size of the church above. In the center stood a stone table. Atop it rested an iron coffin. No flowers. No candles. Only a small plaque engraved with Dominic Holmes. 1831 to 1889. Father of the one who bears the burden of light. Holmes stood frozen. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He whispered. I'm too late. I said nothing. In that moment, I knew, there were no words that could heal. Holmes opened the coffin. Inside lay the remains of a man. An intact skeleton, arms still cradling an old book. Holmes removed the book. It was a journal. We sat down and read each page. They were not moral sermons, but confessions of regret. Dominic Holmes had not left the church because he lost faith, but because he feared that faith might destroy his son. He had once encountered an ancient rite in Vatican scriptures, mentioning a being called the Echoing One. A creature that fed on pain, planted false memories, and made people lose their way. Dominic had tried to seal it away but failed. He vanished not out of cowardice, but to protect his only child. Holmes closed the journal. He took his letter and placed it into the skeleton's hand. I asked, "What will you do now?" He replied, "Memory must be laid to rest. Not through avoidance, but by confrontation." As he let go, the entire chamber trembled. A cold wind blew through, the lantern flickered. Then, a voice spoke, not from anywhere, but from within our minds. "You have said what needed to be said. So I will retreat. But remember, not everyone gets the chance." Silence returned. The coffin shut on its own. And the staircase collapsed just as we exited the crypt. Holmes looked up at the gray sky. His face no longer bore the coldness of before. Something had been cleansed. He said softly, "We are not finished. But for the first time, I feel I'm walking the right path." 3 days later, I received a parcel. No sender. Inside was an old photograph of young Holmes standing next to a man with sorrowful eyes, Dominic Holmes. On the back, in handwritten script, "Thank you for writing the letter. Even if late, it still matters. Don't let the next one take another 20 years. Chapter 6, The Violin in the White Mist. Sound is the last thing to fade in memory, and the first to lead us back into the abyss. December in London is always wrapped in a shroud of mist, like a velvet sheet of frost draped over every alley. On moonless nights, it is said that the distant sound of a violin carried on the wind is either a lullaby for the departed, or a warning to those who have lost their way. I once thought it was only legend, until Holmes, after a sleepless night, suddenly told me to prepare to leave Baker Street. No explanation. No luggage. Just a short sentence. "Tonight we shall hear the violin. And if we're lucky, we'll find the one playing it." We left the house just as the mist had thickened to our waists. Holmes took me to the tram station, but instead of boarding, he turned down an old alley near Charing Cross Station. It was once a district of impoverished workers, now only a few crumbling houses and a forgotten graveyard remained. Holmes led me to an old 2-story manor. The wooden door was tightly shut, one side of the roof had collapsed. No nameplate. No sign of life. But as we approached, I heard a sound as soft as breath, the trembling, haunting sound of a violin. Holmes stopped, didn't knock. He said, "If we can hear it, it means we've already been called. This house no longer belongs to a place, it belongs to a moment." I looked at him, not fully understanding. But I knew Holmes wasn't joking. The door creaked open by itself. No noise, no screeching hinges. Just a darkness so still it suffocated. We stepped inside. Instantly, the space transformed. Instead of an abandoned house, before me was a lavish drawing room, as if from a century past. Oil lamps flickered dimly on the walls. The wallpaper was antique, with swirling golden patterns. From the ceiling hung a crystal chandelier casting a faint white light. In the center of the room sat a man with his back to us, playing a violin. The piece he played was one I had heard Holmes play on sleepless nights, a mournful canon written for restless souls. Holmes stepped forward. The man stopped playing. When he turned around, I was speechless. That face was not entirely human. The right side was youthful, refined. But the left looked burnt, deformed, exposing cheekbone and raw tissue. His left eye was a gaping, black void. He looked at us. His voice echoed as if from the depths of a well. "I've waited a long time." Holmes asked. "Who are you?" The man gave a faint smile. "One who was once called an artist. Then forgotten. My name is Elric Merlot. Don't bother searching police or hospital records, I've been erased from history." I asked. "Why have you called us here?" Elric set down his violin. He stood, stepping closer. The scent of ash and metal clung to him, as if he had once burned in an explosion and survived. "No, I did not summon you. The one behind the darkness did. But I owe a debt to Holmes's father. And because of him, I must deliver a warning." Holmes froze. "You knew my father?" Elric nodded. "Dominic Holmes saved me from madness. When my music began to evoke memories that weren't mine, he was the only one who believed me. He said there was a being that lived in sound, a force that implants false memories into the mind. Echo shade. It needs no body, only ears to hear and a vulnerable heart." Holmes said quietly. "Echo shade hasn't vanished." Elric shook his head. "It only sleeps. But each time a violin plays in solitude, it stirs awake. It needs those who've suffered to continue existing. And now, it has chosen you, Holmes." The air in the room grew unnaturally cold. Holmes was silent for a moment, then asked. "Why me?" Elric stepped even closer. I nearly recoiled from his hollow gaze. "Because there is a void in your heart. A hole in your memory too large to be filled. And you've never truly tried to mend it. Echo shade loves those like you. It whispers in dreams. It makes you question reality. It will make you lose trust in yourself." Holmes calmly replied. "I am not afraid of it." Elric laughed. "That is the most dangerous thing. One who feels no fear never knows when he has already fallen." He turned back to the table, retrieved a crumpled sheet of music, and handed it to Holmes. "This is the final piece I wrote before disaster struck. If you ever hear it played anywhere in this city, run. For that is where Echo Shade is being reborn." The moment the sheet left Elric's hand, the room began to dissolve. Every light was sucked into a black void. The grand house reverted to its original, ruined state. The door slammed shut. We were thrust outside, as if we had never entered. Holmes gripped the sheet tightly. His face was as cold as stone. That night, back at Baker Street, Holmes said nothing. He sat before his violin, Elric's sheet music neatly placed on the stand. I forbade him to play. But he merely replied. "I must understand it before someone else uses it against me." He began to play. The music was cold, shrill, like fingernails scraping the door of the soul. From the very first note, I saw an unbelievable sight. The walls swayed. Books flew from their shelves. Holmes's face contorted, his eyes reddened, sweat pouring down like rain. I rushed forward and yanked the violin from his hands. Everything stopped instantly. Holmes collapsed to the floor, gasping. He whispered. "I saw my mother, she died in my arms, but I've never met her." I was stunned. Holmes had lost his mother at birth. How could he remember? Echo Shade was planting false memories in his mind. The next day, we received news, 3 murders in quick succession in Soho. The victims were all artists. No signs of forced entry, no weapons. Just one thing in common, they died with eyes wide open, blood trickling from their ears, and Elric's music on the table. Holmes stood over the body of a cello player. He looked at me and said grimly, "It has begun its game." I asked, "What do we do?" Holmes replied, "We must go to the place where all sound is born, and where it dies. I didn't understand. But Holmes already had the answer. 3 days later, we arrived at the abandoned Gilded Lyre Theatre in East London. Once the most magnificent stage, it was now nothing but dust and cobwebs. But when we stepped into the main auditorium, I saw every seat occupied, none of the people moved. They sat frozen like wax figures. On stage, there was no one. Yet the music played, Elric's music. Holmes drew his violin. He looked at me and whispered. False memories must be defeated by truth. Deathly sound must be confronted by living sound. He began to play. Holmes's violin was entirely different. It wasn't cold. It wasn't haunting. It was remembrance. It was beginning. It was what had been lost but not extinguished. A beam of light shone from the ceiling onto the stage. The room screeched as if in fury. I saw the audience begin to move. They moaned. Some cried. A few collapsed. But in their eyes, life returned. Echo shades screamed. A sound not from a throat, but from deep within the mind. Holmes played the final crescendo. The strings snapped. But the music kept playing. Echo shade dissolved into the air. The stage cracked. People collapsed, but did not die. Holmes slumped down, exhausted. He murmured. I remember now, my mother used to lull me with this tune, she was the first to resist it. We returned to Baker Street at dawn. I made tea. Holmes stared out the window, a faint smile curling on his lips. I asked. Is it gone? He shook his head. No. But it now knows I am no longer afraid. And sometimes, that is enough to make the darkness retreat. Chapter 7, The Painting Without a Figure. The most terrifying thing is not the darkness, but when the light shines upon a place where a person should be, and reveals nothing. One early winter morning, with London still shrouded in its chill breath, I awoke to the slow, mournful sound of a violin coming from Holmes's room. The melody was soft, steady, as though he were playing not for the living, but for memory. I brewed some tea and stepped in. Holmes sat with his back to me, no sheet music on the stand. His eyes were closed, and he drew the bow across the strings as if searching for something in the invisible spaces around him. I said that it had been 2 weeks since the Gilded Lyre Theatre case, and no other strange events had occurred. Perhaps, just perhaps, we had won. Holmes stopped playing, still not turning around. He said only one sentence. I fear, Watson, that this silence is merely the prelude to what is about to come. He handed me a piece of paper. It was a letter with no return address, the handwriting slanted and smudged, but legible enough. I have painted a picture. But when I finished, the person I painted was no longer in it. Please come. I believe only you can see what I have lost. The address led to an old manor in the suburbs of Highgate, where forgotten artists once lived, awaiting obscurity. We arrived at dusk. A light rain was falling, giving the house an eerie solitude. The manor stood deep within an overgrown garden, its iron gate rusted, plants spilling across the path. A man was waiting at the door, tall, thin, with distant eyes as though staring into an unreal world. He introduced himself as Benedict Vale, a retired painter who had lived alone for over 30 years, receiving no visitors, holding no exhibitions. Holmes asked why he had sent the letter. Benedict said, "There's something in the studio I can no longer control. I cannot leave. And the painting, it has changed, even though I never touched it." He led us to the second floor. The studio was sealed tightly, thick curtains blocking out all light. On the easel was a large canvas depicting a woman seated on a chair in a garden, beneath the shade of an old tree. The strange thing was, the chair remained. The tree remained. But the woman had vanished. Not erased, not obscured, but as if she had never been there at all. I asked if perhaps he was mistaken, that maybe he had never painted a person in the scene. He showed us a photograph taken while the painting was still in progress. Clearly, the woman had been there, sitting quietly with long hair cascading over her shoulders and a book in her hands. Holmes leaned in close, inspecting each brushstroke. Then he asked, "Who was the woman?" Benedict hesitated. After a moment, he said, "She was my wife." I was taken aback. Holmes, unfazed, continued, "She passed away?" Benedict nodded. "Yes. Nearly 40 years ago. But I never stopped seeing her. Painting was how I kept her memory alive. And now, even from that, she has gone." We stayed at the manor that night. Holmes said he wanted to observe the painting's changes. Benedict agreed but never entered the studio again. Around midnight, I was startled awake by the soft creak of a door opening. I left my room to find Holmes already standing at the studio door, a candle in hand. He raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence. We stepped inside. The painting had changed again. Now, not only had the woman disappeared, but the chair was gone too. Cracks had deepened in the tree trunk. And on the ground, there was a faint dark smear, like a shadow retreating. Holmes whispered, "The painting is aging." I asked, "How can a painting change without anyone touching it?" Holmes replied, "Because it is no longer just a painting. It is a memory. And when touched by a certain force, memory can transform itself." I did not understand. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, I believe that the echo does not only exist in sound. It lives in every medium that preserves memory. Photos. Writing. Paintings. Music. Anything that holds emotion, it will seek. And now, it has found its way into the human eye for painting." The next morning, Benedict had vanished. His room was untouched, save for the letter he left behind. I am going to find her. If memory can no longer hold her image, I will step into the painting itself. Perhaps there, we will meet again. Holmes stood in silence for a long time. Then he said, "We need to find the last person who studied painting under Benedict." We traveled to a retirement home for elderly artists in the south of London. There, Holmes found Eliza Hart, a painter who had once been Benedict's student in her youth. She was now over 70, blind in one eye, but her mind remained sharp. Holmes asked if she had ever seen a painting change on its own. She nodded. "Yes. But no one believed me. I once painted a portrait of my late mother. Over several nights, the eyes in the painting slowly blurred. One day, all that was left was the shawl on her shoulders. My mother was no longer there." Holmes asked if she still had the painting. She opened a cabinet and took out an old, dust-covered canvas. There was nothing left on it. Just a cold, gray wall. I shivered. Holmes said, "The echo is changing its mode of existence. It no longer merely implants false memories. It has begun erasing real ones." I asked, "Why?" Holmes replied, "Because once no one remembers, once nothing is preserved, it can recreate everything in its own image. A world with no witnesses. No challengers. A new reality, where it becomes the only truth." We returned to the Highgate Manor at twilight. The painting had changed once more. The garden was gone. Everything was gone. Only a vast white space remained, boundless, dreamlike. I looked at Holmes. He bowed his head, then suddenly picked up a brush and added a single stroke, a footprint on the blank ground. The moment the brushstroke was complete, the room trembled. The painting blurred, then resolved into a new image. Benedict, seen from behind, holding the hand of the woman. They were walking deeper into the white expanse. Holmes murmured, He truly went into the painting. I asked. Can we bring them back? Holmes shook his head. No. But at least we know where they are. And that the echo has not won entirely. A memory, if held with truth and feeling, can still resist erasure. That night, as we left the manor, I saw Holmes glance back at the painting one last time. There was something deep in his eyes, as if he were asking himself. If one day, everyone I love disappears from memory, what reason will I have to go on? I had no answer. Holmes turned away and walked into the night. Chapter 8, The Voice Echoing from the Sealed Basement. The most cruel thing is not a lie, but when the truth is locked away in a place no one dares to listen to. 3 days after the painting vanished in the Highgate mansion, Holmes barely left his room. He stood for hours by the window, no smoking, no violin, no words. I understood what he was watching for. When a silent clue becomes a void, only someone like Holmes has the patience to stare into it and hear. Early on the 4th morning, a messenger knocked on our door. He handed over an envelope sealed in red wax, with no return address. It bore only 2 lines. If you still believe in sound, come to 71 Lambert Street at sunset. The basement will say what no painting can. Holmes read the letter, then stood up immediately. He brought nothing but his old ebony walking stick and a small pouch containing a pair of brass headphones, his own design, crafted years ago during an investigation into ultrasonic phenomena in Vienna. We arrived at Lambert Street at 5 in the evening. The area, in East London, once housed textile factories in the last century, but most had since been abandoned or repurposed into housing for labourers. Number 71 was a 3-story red brick house, with part of the grey-tiled roof collapsed. The ground floor windows were shattered, but the front door had been freshly painted a sleek black, as if someone had recently tended to it. Holmes knocked 3 times. No answer. He turned the handle. The door opened with a creak like the breath of someone waking from a long sleep. Inside, the space was empty. No furniture, no lights. But there was a narrow staircase leading down to the basement. Though the steps were dust-covered, clear footprints showed someone had been coming and going. Holmes went first. I followed. The old wooden stairs groaned under each step, but Holmes pressed on. At the bottom was an iron door, locked with an old-style padlock. Holmes pulled a thin piece of wire from his pocket, and within seconds, the lock clicked open. Inside was a cold, shadowed cellar, as quiet and damp as a tomb awaiting its first occupant. The walls were lined with vintage recording devices, hand-cranked models, many rusted over. About 15 of them were numbered from 1 to 15, arranged in a row like witnesses awaiting trial. We stepped in. Holmes gently placed the headphones over his ears and started machine number 1. I heard only faint static. But Holmes's expression changed. He sat down on the floor and gestured for me to stay silent. I knelt beside him. And then, through the headphones, I began to hear it too. A voice, not speaking, but crying. A child sobbing, broken and terrified. Then came a woman's voice, faint, repeating one line. Remember his name. If no one remembers, he will vanish from this world. Holmes switched to machine number 2. Another voice spoke, this one hoarse, frenzied. I wrote his name on the wall. But by morning, every letter was gone. Something had licked it clean. The name. The shadow. Everything. We listened to the tapes, one by one. Each held a strange fragment of sound, echoes from a shared nightmare across generations. Male voices. Female voices. Children's voices. Each recounted a variation of the same terror, being erased from memory, not just by the living, but by history itself. Holmes paused at tape number 9. This time, the voice was calm and deep. A man spoke slowly. My name is Edgar Lynn. I'm the last living member of the Society for the Preservation of Sound. We once believed memory could endure if we recorded enough true sound. But the echo has gone beyond what we can control. It no longer merely imitates. It reconstructs reality. If it erases someone's name from memory for long enough, the world rewrites itself as if they never existed. The tape ended with the sound of knocking. 3 knocks, like a call from another realm. Holmes was silent for a long time. At last, he said, "Watson, we are no longer facing a force that forges false memories. We are confronting an entity determined to erase true ones. When someone vanishes from collective memory, the world adjusts itself to conceal the void. Like this house. Like the people we once knew and no one remembers." I asked. "Then who recorded these tapes? Why lead us here?" Holmes gave a thin smile. "Because someone is resisting the echo from within." At that moment, the basement door slammed shut. All light was consumed. I turned on my flashlight, but the beam could not pierce the darkness. As if we were inside a space no longer governed by physical law. Then a voice rang out, not through a tape, not through any device, but directly from all around us. "You should not have come. But since you have, listen to everything." Wind rose, though no air moved. And then, within that space, images began to appear, not to the eyes, but in the mind. I saw a little girl sitting at her desk, drawing a cat. But the lines faded. When she asked her mother, the woman no longer knew what a cat was. An old man stood in the street, calling his wife's name. But when he looked around, people told him he had never had a wife. A young man stood before the house where he grew up. But now, it was just an empty lot. No one remembered it had ever been a home. Holmes called out. "Who are you?" The voice answered. "I am what is not preserved. I am forgetting. I am what remains after the last person forgets. I do not need to exist. I only need no one to remember the name." Holmes whispered. "Then who sent the letter? Who brought us here?" The voice fell silent. Then, one final tape began to play, machine number 16, not among the original numbered set. A voice spoke. Holmes's own voice. "If you're hearing this, then I have found you. But I cannot fight you with logic. You have no need for logic. I have only one way. To leave my voice inside you. If you carry me, then I am the part of you that cannot be erased. And so, you are no longer omnipotent." The voice stopped. The room shook. The basement door flew open. Holmes turned to me. "Let's go. I've left what was needed. Now it carries me, and I carry it. A war within the enemy's own mind." On the way back, I asked. "Are you sure this will work?" Holmes replied. "No. But if I don't try, the day will come when I look in the mirror and won't know who I am. And worse, no one else will know I ever was." I gripped the steering wheel tightly. Mist began to gather on the windshield. Each droplet like a suspended question mark. Behind us, house number 71 sank into the dark. Chapter 9, The Room Without a Door. Not every room needs a door to be entered. Some places can only be opened from within the mind, when memory is awakened. Winter descended upon London like a prolonged sigh, silent, damp, and colder than in any year past. 2 weeks had passed since Holmes and I had left 71 Lambert Street, the house where sound preserved erased memories, where darkness had spoken in the voices of those long forgotten. Since then, Holmes had changed noticeably. He no longer grew irritable over small things, nor did he carry himself with unshakable confidence. In its place was a deep silence, as if he were trying to hold on to his own existence in a world gradually forgetting him. On a morning in early December, I walked into the sitting room and found him staring intently at an old photograph. It showed 3 men standing in front of a white brick house, where a cracked wooden sign bore, faintly, a handwritten line, Gilbourne Asylum. I had never seen Holmes possess such a photograph. When I asked him about it, he simply replied, "We're going to this place today." I asked no further. I was accustomed to following Holmes into places where logic no longer served as our guide. We boarded the first train to the northern outskirts of London, and after more than 2 hours, found ourselves before the rusted iron gates of a crumbling estate, swallowed by ivy and dense fog. The Gilbourne Asylum appeared like a memory stolen from a dream. The main building had 3 stories, yet every window was sealed tight, not a trace of light escaping. Holmes pointed to a second-floor window, where the curtain fluttered slightly, as though someone were standing behind it. We entered. There was no one to greet us, but the door was unlocked. Inside, dust blanketed the furniture, wallpaper peeled from the walls, and all signs of life had long since vanished. Still, the faint scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, as if the place had been preserved for someone's eventual return. Holmes led me down a narrow corridor that ended at an unnumbered door. When we pushed it open, I was struck with vertigo. It was a square room, windowless, with no exit other than the door we had just entered. On the wall opposite was a large circle drawn in charcoal, filled with hundreds of jagged symbols resembling a coded script. In the center stood an old wooden chair. Sitting in it was a gaunt man, head bowed, wrists bound with white cloth. I stepped forward to examine him. He was still alive, but his breathing was slow and shallow, his eyes tightly shut. Holmes did not rush. He examined the walls, pressing his hands against every crack, every brick. At last, he said, "This is not a prison. It is the last place where the memory of a man, completely forgotten by the world, has been preserved." I asked, "Do you know who this man is?" Holmes did not answer. Instead, he approached the man and retrieved a small device from his coat, a listening instrument shaped like an antique stethoscope. He placed it on the man's ear, then turned to me. "If my hypothesis is correct, this man is not just a victim. He is the key to the true nature of what is manipulating humanity's memory." As soon as Holmes finished speaking, the room trembled faintly. The wall behind the chair began to shift color, fading from gray to inky black. On it, lines of text appeared. "Memory does not die. It merely hides in the places no one dares to search." I looked at Holmes. He had closed his eyes. I followed suit. And then, without a word between us, we both fell into a strange state, neither waking nor dreaming, just listening to a very old, very deep sound within ourselves. We found ourselves in another room. A room without a ceiling, only a black sky above, filled with countless stars glittering as if they were falling. In the center of the room was a courtroom. There was no judge, no defendant. Only empty chairs, and from them, voices echoed. "We are the last council of remembrance. Each time a soul is forgotten, we lose a piece of our voice." Holmes stepped forward. "Why do you let memory fade? Why not resist?" The voice replied, weaker this time. "Because we have no one left who remembers to tell the story. Each person who forgets a truth closes another door. When no doors remain open, we are trapped forever in the room without an exit." I cried out. "Then what must we do to reopen those doors?" Silence stretched. Then the sky above us quaked, the stars dissolving, and a final voice rang out. "Take his name from this room. Speak it aloud, and he shall be remembered." Holmes opened his eyes. I did the same. We were back in the original room. The man still sat motionless, but his breathing had grown faster. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, paper and pen." I handed them to him. He wrote. "His name is Nathaniel Grieve." Then Holmes spoke the name aloud, clearly and firmly. "Nathaniel Grieve. Nathaniel Grieve." Nathaniel Grieve. The air in the room seemed to be sucked away for a moment. Then the man opened his eyes. They were hollow, yet lucid. He whispered, "Am I still alive?" Holmes nodded. "And you are still remembered." The man began to cry. Not out of fear, but because it had been so long since he'd heard his own name spoken. On the way home, Holmes sat in silence. I asked, "Do you think saying someone's name aloud is truly enough to recover memory?" He replied, "A name is the link between the present and the past. But if no one believes in a name, no matter how loudly you shout it, it becomes just another sound adrift." I asked, "Then what's our next step?" Holmes answered, "We must find the last place where memory is stored before it is erased completely. A place that cannot be mapped. But we'll know when we're close." A week later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single line. The place where the last person remembered himself. That is where all memory began to be stolen. Beneath it was a torn scrap of map, marking the location of a small village called Reedon Hollow. A place I had never seen in any atlas of London. Holmes looked at the scrap, then smiled faintly. "The next door has begun to open." Chapter 10, Reedon Hollow and the Moonless Night. When darkness blankets the world, it is the light within the mind that must lead us back to truth. After receiving the strange piece of map, Holmes and I wasted no time. Reedon Hollow was marked on the torn parchment, located in a remote countryside to the northwest of London, a place few had heard of and even fewer had ever visited. There were no signs of development, only winding dirt roads cutting through ancient forests, where the only sounds were the whispering wind and the rustle of leaves. We arrived in Reedon Hollow at twilight. The sky was a dull gray, and the sun had already vanished, as if a moonless night had descended ahead of schedule. The village appeared, small and time-worn, with thatched-roof cottages, moss-covered wooden walls, and tightly shut doors that seemed to repel strangers. Holmes walked slowly, his eyes never leaving the map. He observed every detail, footprints on the soft earth, the lingering scent of burned wood in the air, and the faint flicker of lights that glowed momentarily from a few windows before disappearing. I asked, "Do you feel anything strange, Holmes?" He shook his head, but his eyes lit up. "Something is being hidden here. Things that ordinary light cannot reveal." We entered the village's only pub. Inside sat a group of elderly men huddled around a rotting wooden table, the light from an oil lamp casting long, distorted shadows across their faces. No one paid any attention to our arrival. Holmes spoke. "We are investigating a strange phenomenon involving lost memories. Does anyone here know anything about that?" A silver-bearded man sneered, speaking in a low, grave voice. "That is not something the people here like to talk about." This village was once the refuge of a scholar named Alistair Crane, who disappeared mysteriously over 30 years ago. They say he was studying the secrets of the mind and memory. But ever since he vanished, things in Reedon Hollow have started to change. People gradually began to forget the old ways, their cherished memories, and a chill settled over us, as if something was stealing pieces of our minds. Holmes listened intently, a glimmer of curiosity and determination in his eyes. He turned to me. "This is the first real lead that takes us to the root of the mystery. If Alistair Crane truly researched memory, he might be the first victim, or even the center, of this spreading amnesia. We must learn where he worked and lived." We left the pub after night had fully fallen. The cold pierced through our coats. The village had become eerie under the dim, flickering glow of the few remaining street lamps. Holmes decided we would not rest that night. Instead, we headed straight to the last house in the village, said to have belonged to Alistair Crane. The house was nestled in a wild, overgrown garden filled with withered shrubs and tangled weeds. The iron gate creaked and groaned as we pushed it open. A musty, earthy smell overwhelmed us. Inside, the walls were plastered with papers and notes. The beam from Holmes's old oil lamp revealed twisting, complex writing scrawled everywhere. Holmes began to read aloud. Memory manipulation is not a delusion. When one accesses the deepest layer of a person's memory, one can create a labyrinth of the mind, making a person forget even themselves. I looked around the room and felt an odd energy closing in on us. Holmes opened a thick journal and read further. If all memory is lost, what remains is a soulless shell. But memory never truly vanishes. It exists in another dimension, one that only those who know how to search may reach. As the night deepened, we still had no definitive answers, but clues were slowly emerging. Holmes began reconstructing a model of memory pathways based on Crane's notes. We realized there was a strange network structure where memories were stored in layers, stacked atop one another, and could be destroyed or stolen by an unknown scientific method. Suddenly, the room trembled softly. The wall behind us began to shimmer, revealing ghostly images, faces, distant memories, children playing, women weeping, and people being swallowed by darkness. Holmes sighed. We are touching a world the human intellect has never fully explored, a world where memory is the key to survival. I asked. So what's our next step? He replied. We must decipher this network. Find the origin of the memory loss to save the souls trapped in the shadows. Just then, a strange sound echoed outside the door. Holmes quickly extinguished the lamp and pulled me into the darkest corner of the room. The door creaked open. A shadow flickered and then vanished. Reedon Hollow was guarding secrets far darker than we had imagined. For hours afterward, Holmes and I searched every corner of the house, every document, every trace that might lead to a new clue. We discovered another small map marking the location of a nearby forest, known to the locals as the Forest of the Lost. According to tales, this was a place where many had entered, never to return, or returned hollow, their memories stripped, like lost souls wandering through their own lives. Holmes decided we would venture into the forest the next morning. I felt that the journey ahead would be the greatest trial we had ever faced, not merely a quest for truth, but a battle to preserve ourselves from being consumed by the dark labyrinth of forgotten memories. That night, under the dim, flickering light of the old house, I looked at Holmes and saw a fierce determination burning in his eyes. Though darkness lay ahead, we would press on, for only by facing the darkness can one hope to find the true light. Chapter 11, Entering the Forest of the Lost, Where Memories Go Astray. In the deepest darkness, the truth never sleeps, it only waits for someone brave enough to face it directly. On a gloomy early morning, Holmes and I prepared to leave Alistair Crane's old house and venture into the Forest of the Lost. The air was thick with moisture and dense fog blanketed the ground, making everything appear blurred, as if the world was trapped in a half-awake dream. This was no simple journey, it was a voyage into the very depths of memory and the human mind, where all things could be penetrated and distorted. Holmes had thoroughly studied Crane's notes and the map that recorded the dense forest areas where strange phenomena had been reported. According to these, the Forest of the Lost was not an ordinary forest but contained mysterious energy points capable of affecting the human mind. The locals always warned that anyone who entered risked not returning intact. We walked silently, the only sounds were the dry leaves crunching beneath our feet and distant bird calls. Holmes led the way, his eyes fixed on the path, analyzing signs on the ground and the changes in light filtering through the canopy. I stayed close, sensing each cold breath and subtle shifts in the atmosphere around us. We gradually approached a particular area of ancient forest, where trees grew densely and roots stretched above the earth like tangled veins. The air felt heavier, carrying an inexplicable oppressive aura. Holmes stopped and took out a complex measuring device he had engineered himself to detect unusual energy signals. The device emitted a series of strange sounds while its screen displayed strong fluctuations. He said, "This confirms we are standing on a convergence point of extremely rare spiritual energy. This is the source of the memory loss phenomena Crane studied." I asked, But how can this energy affect the human mind so profoundly? Holmes replied. We don't fully understand the exact mechanism yet, but according to Crane's documents, this energy can disrupt neural connections, destroying or distorting memories stored in the brain. That's why so many get trapped in the labyrinth of memory and cannot escape. We pressed deeper into the forest, the daylight dimming steadily. Suddenly, the surroundings seemed to shift, no longer the actual scenery but hazy images appearing before our eyes. I saw fleeting shadows, scenes from the past, echoing with haunting laughter and cries. Holmes stopped, his gaze fixed on an indefinite space where something seemed to beckon. He cautiously stepped forward and reached out his hand to touch the air, as if trying to connect with another dimension. I clearly sensed that the truth was unfolding before us, yet this place was also the most sophisticated trap we had to face. Every step forward meant delving deeper into the maze of memories and danger. We found a narrow path leading to an underground cellar hidden beneath layers of roots and earth. This could be where Alistair Crane conducted his research, and perhaps the starting point of the mystery surrounding the forest. Holmes switched on his flashlight, the cold darkness enveloping us. We stepped inside, the stifling atmosphere making every breath harder. The walls were covered with symbols and complex diagrams, like a mental map drawn with the blood and tears of those who had ventured here before. Holmes began examining old documents detailing experiments and discoveries Crane had made. According to these, Crane had tested a special device designed to expand access to the deepest layers of human memory. This device worked by generating vibrational frequencies interacting with the brain, enabling the user to traverse locked layers of memory. But from this point, strange events began to happen. Sudden memory loss in many, crucial memories vanishing as if sucked into oblivion, and even some people disappearing without a trace. Holmes emphasized. We must find a way to reverse this process before it's too late. Otherwise, humanity might be erased not just by time, but by forces beyond our control. Inside the cellar, a faint light fell upon an old metal box secured with a complex lock. Holmes carefully opened it, revealing small electronic devices along with Crane's recordings and personal journals. Page by page, the story of the struggle against the darkness of memory became vivid. I felt that we were facing a secret far greater than I had imagined. Memory was not merely stored data, but a part of the human soul. When memory is lost, the human essence gradually dissolves. Holmes spoke solemnly. We need to return to Crane's device and find a way to perfect it, to restore memories for those who have lost them. This is a race against time and darkness, and I cannot afford to fail. I nodded, sharing his resolve. Though the road ahead was long and arduous, I knew that for Holmes, truth and justice were always the guiding lights through the darkest nights. Chapter 12, The Mysterious Code, the Steel Box and the Whispers of the Past. Truth always lies in the smallest details, the seemingly invisible things hold the power to change destiny. The pale light from the oil lamp in the makeshift laboratory inside the empty house cast a dim glow on the ancient devices and the torn papers scattered across the table. Holmes was intently staring at the steel box, the very object we had just discovered in the deep cellar beneath the forest of the lost. This box bore a sequence of complicated symbols and codes, seemingly the final mystery left behind by Alistair Crane. I stood beside him, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. Holmes had spent days researching and experimenting with the devices Crane had left, but this was the first time he was focusing entirely on such a peculiar object. He said nothing, only gently running his hand over the surface of the box. It was not merely an ordinary box but felt like a key unlocking layers of secrets that had remained shrouded in darkness for years. Holmes tilted his head, his eyes flashing with the light of discovery. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock and our steady breathing. I knew this was not only a test of intellect but also a race against time and forces determined to prevent the truth from being revealed. Holmes slowly pulled out a small toolkit and began carefully dismantling the complex lock with precise instruments. Each step was executed meticulously, like a jeweler polishing a precious gem without leaving a scratch. As soon as the box lid opened, a cold breeze swept out, carrying a musty scent of time and dust. Inside lay a yellowed parchment scroll and a small device shaped like a pocket watch but containing strange electronic components intertwined within. Holmes took out the scroll and carefully spread it on the table. It displayed a detailed map and notes written in faded ink, the handwriting elegant yet imbued with mystery. This was clearly a map leading to a location Crane referred to as the origin of memory. He read aloud the words. The origin of memory lies not in ordinary recollection, but deep within the tiny nuclei of time and space in the brain. This device can expand the ability to access and restore lost memories, but it is a double-edged sword that can also destroy what remains unexplored. I looked up at Holmes, seeing his thoughtful but resolute gaze. He said, "We cannot let these works fall into the wrong hands. Every new discovery can change how we understand humans and their minds. But at the same time, the potential dangers cannot be ignored." We immediately decided to set out following the map toward a cave deep within the mountain range outside the city. Holmes believed this place held the remaining parts of the device Crane had experimented with, along with secrets to unravel the mystery surrounding the Forest of the Lost. The journey to the mountains was far from easy. The path was treacherous and rugged, with many stretches requiring climbing steep cliffs and navigating dense forest. Every step demanded utmost concentration, not allowing for the slightest mistake. But this only heightened the drama and allure of the adventure. We passed hills shrouded in thick mist, then crossed babbling streams whose flowing water sounded like nature's guiding melody. Holmes stopped frequently to check the map, compare it with the actual terrain, and observe signs of animals and human footprints to verify the correct direction. One gloomy afternoon, we discovered the cave entrance hidden by a huge boulder, almost forgotten amid the wild nature. According to Crane's notes, this was the gateway to the memory center, the place where all wonders and dangers converged. Holmes shone a super bright flashlight inside, but the dense darkness was like a curtain blocking the way. We carried energy detection devices, and the results showed strong fluctuations emanating from deep underground. I shivered as Holmes whispered, "This place may hold the key to all mysteries. But it could also be where Crane paid a heavy price to protect it." We prepared our gear, activated exploration devices, and cautiously entered the cave. The air was icy cold, every step echoed with muffled sounds, as if the ghosts of the past were watching us. On the cave walls, I noticed ancient drawings, symbols, and markings similar to those on the map. Holmes meticulously decoded each symbol, realizing it was a secret language guiding the brave to enter the center and escape safely. Deeper inside, strange sensations began to arise. I saw vague images of the past, vivid moments of those who had stepped here before. There were whispers, faint voices, and cries for help echoing through the space, stirring a heavy feeling in my chest. Holmes found a chamber containing a complex electronic device protected by a high-security locking system. He started dismantling parts to find a way to reactivate it. The goal was to recover stored data and enable the function to restore memories for those who had lost them. The exploration lasted for hours, but suddenly a loud noise startled us. We looked toward the cave entrance, where darkness seemed to compress. A stranger appeared, eyes sharp and steps firm, advancing toward us. The confrontation began. Not only between Holmes and the mysterious figure but also a tense battle of wits to protect the truth and free the lost souls trapped in the labyrinth of memories. Chapter 13, Light Within Darkness, The Mystery of the One Behind the Curtain. The truth is never completely obscured, light always finds a way to pierce through the deepest darkness. At dawn, while the city of London was still shrouded in a hazy mist, Holmes and I returned from the mysterious mountain range with the steel box and the data not yet fully decoded. The story of the memory center we had uncovered still left my mind in turmoil, a maze where truth and darkness intertwined. Holmes looked at me with a determined gaze, as if he had devised a new plan for the next steps. In our familiar room on Baker Street, Holmes immediately began analyzing the data collected from the center inside the cave. He spread out maps, notes, video clips, and electronic signals on the table, examining every tiny detail carefully. I stood beside him, feeling the invisible pressure of the urgency imposed by time. The air in the room was thick with the smell of tobacco and old books. Holmes took slow drags from his pipe, then exhaled, his eyes fixed thoughtfully on the screens. He started linking clues to events that had happened before, traces left by Alistair Crane and those who pursued him. Suddenly, Holmes pointed to a spot on the map and said, "This is where we must go next, an old mansion located on the outskirts of London. The data from the memory center indicates there is a secret storage system here that Crane used to control important memories." I felt a chill run down my spine when I heard him mention this mansion. Previously, this house had been the site of strange disappearances the police had never been able to explain. There were even rumors about inexplicable supernatural phenomena. Holmes paid no mind to ghost stories, he believed only in scientific truth and logic, not shaken by superstition. But what mattered was that if we could find this storage system, we might better understand Crane's true intentions and find a way to stop the sinister plan behind it. After careful preparation, we set out in silence. No one spoke, only the sound of wheels rolling on the stone road and the wind rustling through the leaves. I sensed a heavy atmosphere, as if the mansion was awaiting us with secrets still unrevealed. Upon arrival, the mansion appeared ancient but still exuded an aura of preserved grandeur. The heavy wooden door was tightly shut, limestone walls covered in green moss, and all windows firmly closed made the house seem like an isolated island amidst darkness. Holmes quickly used his detective tools to inspect traces around. He found scattered footprints, signs of someone having come recently, possibly a person trying to protect the mansion's secrets. We stepped inside, where the faint afternoon light couldn't penetrate the thick dust covering the furnishings. Everything was eerily silent, only our footsteps echoed along the long, narrow corridors. Holmes led me to a room downstairs where electronic devices were hidden inside secret drawers. He discovered a vintage server connected to a series of hard drives and storage devices. This seemed to be the control center for recording and replaying memories. As Holmes began manipulating the devices, faint images appeared on the screens, carrying memories locked deep in time. But they were incomplete, the video segments were interrupted, and it seemed someone had deliberately deleted or altered parts. Suddenly, a warning signal flashed. Someone else was also trying to access the system, and they did not want us to uncover its secrets. Sounds came from outside, and the door was knocked heavily, a clear warning. Holmes showed no fear, he immediately locked down the devices and prepared to respond. I felt tension engulf the entire room. Someone was very close. Not just an enemy, but a person well aware of what we were doing. A battle of wits, a psychological duel, was about to unfold right here. And this was only the beginning of a series of events that would reveal many more secrets about the adventure of the empty house. Chapter 14, The Chase in the Darkness, The Final Battle. The truth never sinks into darkness forever, it only waits for the moment to burst forth brilliantly. The moment the door to the server room slammed shut, a cold chill spread throughout the ancient room. Holmes and I stood silently, listening for the faintest sounds in the stillness. Outside, the footsteps echoed more clearly than before. The mysterious figure was not merely here to intimidate, they carried a ruthless determination. We knew we were standing on the brink of an unprecedented confrontation. Holmes wasted no time, he quickly used a small device that emitted a dim blue light to scan the room for any signs of movement. I held a flashlight, sweeping it along the moss-covered walls where weak light could not reach. Every silence felt heavy, as if ghosts from the past were watching us. Suddenly, a secret door opened slightly, and a shadow darted past like a black leopard in the night. We immediately gave chase, but the mansion's winding corridors, like a labyrinth, made pursuit complicated. The rapid footsteps mixed with our heavy breathing echoed steadily in the darkness. Holmes gave directions as we moved, maintaining absolute calm. This was the strength of a man who always trusted reason and his keen observational instincts. I tried not to lose sight of the opponent, though at times I felt exhausted and afraid. The figure vanished down a left-turn corridor. We ran at full speed, and suddenly a beam from a small headlamp flashed directly into my eyes. I blinked and saw clearly the cold face of an unknown man, his eyes sharp like a bird of prey. He turned around, looking at us with contempt, then suddenly threw a small object toward Holmes. A smoke bomb exploded, filling the hallway with thick smoke, obscuring vision and forcing us to stop immediately. The dense smoke crept into my lungs, making it hard to breathe, and anger flared within me. Despite the limited visibility, Holmes managed to open the nearest door and led me down the stairs amid countless sparks from a destroyed electrical system. The rusty clanging metal echoed like a warning that danger could strike at any moment. We descended into the basement, a large, sturdy chamber built from thick concrete slabs. This was a secret part of the house few knew about. Holmes quickly found a safe spot and pulled out a radio frequency detection device from his bag to search for enemy signals. Meanwhile, the noises from above grew faint, indicating the enemy had temporarily withdrawn or changed tactics. Holmes analyzed the data and discovered a strange frequency operating with extremely complex encryption. From this information, Holmes concluded that the enemy not only wanted to keep secrets but was also controlling a vast network linking technological devices to monitor all our movements. I asked Holmes, if that was the case, did we have any way to stop this network? He replied that the first step was to trace the main signal source somewhere in this area. But with the defensive systems and deadly traps, the journey would be very difficult and risky. At that moment, a strange sound came from afar. A small drone appeared in the dim space, its red and green lights blinking continuously, signaling the approach of a dangerous presence. Holmes quickly activated a jamming device to disrupt the drone's signal. The technological battle began, and together we worked to disable each device. Light and sound clashed, creating a chaotic scene between the modern and the ancient. While racing against time, Holmes and I discovered an underground tunnel leading out of the mansion. This passage could help us escape danger or approach the enemy's secret base. I looked into Holmes's eyes, and he nodded as if to say that it was time for everything to end. We stepped into the cold tunnel, preparing for the final confrontation between light and darkness. The adventure at the empty house had lasted many months filled with mysteries and unanswered questions, but now we were approaching the final destination, where all truths would be revealed, and where the enemy, standing in the light, could no longer escape. Chapter 15, Knowing How to Walk Alone, Then You Know How to Choose a Worthy Companion. When one understands the value of solitude, one can clearly see who is truly worthy to walk alongside them. The surroundings around us were so dark that every breath seemed as if it could be swallowed whole by the night. The cold underground tunnel led out from the ancient mansion where, for months, we had held our ground, facing countless unprecedented dangers. Holmes walked ahead, each step steady as if he had memorized every most dangerous nook and cranny. Yet, inside me, an unease would not fade. This adventure was no longer a simple case but had turned into a battle between two opposing forces, where survival and intellect intertwined in every moment. We passed damp, moldy walls, the faint light from the flashlight in my hand casting floating dust motes like sleeping souls. Holmes quietly said, "This path will lead to a new world, where every mystery of the empty house will be revealed." Since the beginning of the journey, I had witnessed solitude seep into every action of Holmes. He depended on no one, did not let emotion sway him, using only intellect and observation to move forward. And now, standing beside him at this decisive moment, I understood that everyone needs a silent space, a stillness to truly see themselves and their companions. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from the end of the tunnel, startling me. Holmes stopped immediately, placing a finger on his lips signaling silence. We both sank into absolute focus, prepared for whatever might come. From the darkness, a group appeared, armed with cold weapons, their eyes sharp like knives. They were not our enemies but secret allies Holmes had quietly contacted. They led us through a discreet exit into a room full of maps, documents, and modern equipment. Holmes shared that this was the command center of the resistance group fighting to dismantle the dark conspiracy surrounding the empty house. From the clues gathered, they believed the mastermind behind everything was a dangerous criminal organization with a global network. However, Holmes still harbored deep doubts about the true identity of the ringleader, for the last trace we found in the secret room was not convincing enough. He decided to act alone to approach and end the case. I felt loneliness rise when I heard this decision but also understood that to solve the deepest mysteries, sometimes one must accept walking alone, carrying no one's burden. That is when we truly understand who is worthy to be a companion. Before Holmes left, he handed me an old pocket watch, containing the most advanced technology of the group, telling me to wait and be ready to assist if needed. He stepped out of the room like a shadow, disappearing into the darkness with an unyielding will. I stayed behind, looking at his footprints on the cold floor, feeling the strength of a man who dares to walk alone in search of truth. The following days passed in tension and worry. Each piece of news from Holmes revealed a new secret, a puzzle piece in the vast picture we were building together. Finally, Holmes returned, not the ordinary man anymore but a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and courage. He brought undeniable evidence proving the criminal organization had been dismantled, and the masterminds punished. We looked at each other, no words needed, but we understood that all hardships and dangers had been worth it. Through this long journey, I realized something deeper than ever before. Knowing how to walk alone is the art of maturity, but choosing a worthy companion is life's greatest value. The empty house was no longer a place of darkness and mystery but a mark of those who relentlessly fought for truth and justice. Holmes and I stepped out of the mansion, dawn beginning to break, illuminating the road ahead with all hope and new promises. The adventure had ended, but the journey of self-discovery continued. Within each of us lies an empty house waiting to be filled with courage, intellect, and true friendship. Chapter 16, The Complete Conclusion of the Case. It is often said that every mystery will eventually be revealed, as long as one patiently pursues it to the end. The dawn light filtered through the thick foliage, illuminating the path leading to the ancient mansion that, for months, had become the center of one of the most tangled and complex cases in Sherlock Holmes's career. I stood beside him, feeling an atmosphere both heavy and exhilarating, because this moment marked the end of what seemed an endless adventure. The journey from the empty house to the heart of the most dangerous conspiracy had lasted many months filled with countless twists and turns. Holmes, with his extraordinary intellect, along with my help and that of our allies, gradually untangled the most difficult knots. But as Holmes had said before, in the most complicated cases, the important thing is not only to find the truth but to understand the profound nature behind it. Over the past several weeks, Holmes had quietly conducted investigations, gathering more evidence, observing the suspects, and analyzing every smallest detail. Secret audio recordings, samples collected from the crime scenes, and intelligence information were connected like a tangled web, gradually revealing the true nature of the criminal organization behind everything. A hidden mastermind with the ability to skillfully manipulate underground social networks used the empty house as a base to coordinate illegal activities ranging from smuggling to high-tech espionage. But Holmes saw not only the criminals but also the darker side of human ambition, the price paid for power and deception. We prepared a meticulous plan to completely dismantle this organization. Holmes stood before a large map spread on the table, pointing at each marked spot representing important locations. He assigned each person their task, ensuring every step would be executed accurately and swiftly. I was tasked with leading a small team into the underground room beneath the empty house, where the most important documents were hidden. Our footsteps were quiet but certain, hearts full of determination. I still vividly remember the tense mixture of excitement and fear as the heavy metal door slowly opened. Inside was a room equipped with modern devices, computer screens displaying classified data on illegal transactions and criminal plans. We collected every file, copied every piece of information without leaving a trace. The silence was broken only by heavy breaths and the light footsteps of our team. At the same time, Holmes and the larger group outside intercepted the remaining members of the organization. Tense clashes and spectacular pursuits happened in quick succession, making the atmosphere more intense than ever. Yet Holmes remained calm, leading the team like a seasoned commander, systematically taking down the opponents. When everything was under control, Holmes called for an urgent meeting. In the dim light of the main room, he presented undeniable evidence revealing the entire conspiracy and operational methods of the criminal organization. The ringleaders, once hidden in darkness, could no longer escape the punishment of the law. I looked at Holmes with deep admiration. He was not only an outstanding detective but also a steadfast warrior for justice and truth. The adventure had ended, leaving many lessons about perseverance, intellect, and most importantly, the courage to confront the darkness within humanity. As the morning light shone through the window, I realized the empty house was no longer a place of haunting but had become a symbol of light's victory over darkness. Holmes stepped outside, his gaze resolute yet radiating a rare peace. We left the house, stepping into a new chapter where justice is upheld and truth honored. The adventure was over, but the journey to uncover life's secrets continued, a reminder that no matter where or under what circumstances, intellect and courage will always lead the way.